Broadcasting the information the mainstream media won't touch. This is The Richie Allen Show in association with DavidIke.com.
Thrilled that our next guest is was giving us some time today. Of all days, he, as we've mentioned many times before, is a former CIA analyst. He's now a political activist and a big champion of Veterans for Peace. He won the Intelligence Commendation Medal. Want to mention again, he briefed 5 presidents in a long career and a distinguished career at the CIA. Delighted to welcome back to the programme Ray McGovern. Ray, welcome back and thanks for taking the call. How are you?
Thank you, Richie. I'm fine. How are you?
Oh, I've been better. Got the old lurgy, got the old head cold and that, like everybody else, Ray. But I'm not going to cry about it. There's a lot worse off than me. There's a lot worse off than me. First of all, by the way, before I forget, not that I would forget, folks, to read terrific articles, incredibly well briefed opinions on everything that's been going on, not just over the last couple of days, but in the last few years. Do go to raymcgovern.com. We'll tweet that out now immediately. Ray, there's lots to talk about. We will talk about John Kerry. We will talk about the wider issues around what's happened in Ankara yesterday. But I first of all want to ask you, because I've been trying to figure out this since yesterday, what's your opinion, Ray, on who is supposed to be protecting senior diplomats employed overseas? I can't find out whether the Russian ambassador's security was entrusted to the Turkish authorities or whether he should have been protected by his own people. What do you think has gone on there yesterday?
Well, it's a both and, Richie. Legally or by custom, the host country is supposed to protect diplomats. You'll never see John Kerry roaming around without 5 or 6 thugs menacing anyone who might get near him. So it is the practice also for, quote, important, quote, countries to have their own security. But this is a tough one. I mean, this was a cop. This was a security guy himself who probably didn't even have to go through the machine there. He was as I understand it, a member of the Turkish police and a special unit of some kind. And so he was of, quote, unquestioned loyalty, end quote. And those things going to happen, especially when these wars drag on forever and people no longer can disguise their sentiments with respect to who they think is responsible for the carnage. And that's what we're talking about, isn't it? Carnage.
It certainly is, Ray. Who benefited from the murder of Andrei Karlov yesterday? Who could possibly have been behind it, and to what end?
Well, before the returns are in here, it looks as though this fellow did it in a momentary act of, terrorism in response to perceived carnage there in Syria. Now, what he hoped to achieve by this, other than a retaliation, other than making a big statement, which he certainly did, is not known to me and probably won't be known to others until several days go by and we can look at this fellow. There's a big expression used in this country where we talk about Muslims who do terrorism and they have no connection, no apparent connection to Al Qaeda or Nusra and the international terrorists. And so we say that they're self-radicalized. Okay, so it's as though you get up in the morning, you look and out the window, it's a pretty nice day, you look in the mirror and say, this looks like a pretty good day to self-radicalize. So I think I'll self-radicalize and go and shoot somebody. Now, come on. Everyone has a reason, okay? Now, it may be a perverted reason, but when you look at defeating terrorism, you're not going to defeat it with jet planes or drones or tanks. All you do is create more terrorists that way. I use the analogy when people ask me, well, how do you defeat terrorism? And I say, well, the same way you defeat malaria. And they say, and I say, yeah, with malaria, you find the mosquitoes, right? And you trace them back to the swamp. And then you find a swamp. Okay, and then what do? Well, or you encircle the swamp with 3 platoons of sharpshooters, and and you shoot as many mosquitoes as you can coming out of the swamp, right?
Right.
And they look at you and say, well, no, that's not right. I said, that's right, yeah. Now, there's a deep swamp of grievances on the part of people who have been pushed aside, people who have been suppressed. I'm talking about Palestinians, I'm talking about Iraqis, and Afghans, and Libyans. A deep, deep swamp. Now, unless you drain that swamp, unless you address those grievances, this is just going to escalate as it has for the last 15 years, out of sight. So don't try to shoot all the mosquitoes coming out of the swamp. Address the swamp and drain it, for God's sake. And the way you drain it is take these people seriously and don't shoot them up with jet planes.
One of the most extraordinary things that happened yesterday, in a day of extraordinary things, was the Syrian ambassador to the United Nations, Dr. Bashar al-Jafari, listing a number of men by name and by country whom the Syrian government believes are still inside the remaining very tiny jihadist-held pocket of eastern Aleppo. That's extraordinary to hear that. He's named them. Nobody's denied the existence of any of these guys yet, Ray. But for those who have labelled people like you as conspiracy theorists and as, loony lefties, and I'm not saying anybody's ever called you a loony lefty, but isn't this absolute proof of the sort of meddling in these affairs that you've been talking about on programs like this for years? These guys are there. The Syrians say they're there. They know who they are, and that they've been training these so-called moderate rebels. It's game over, Ray, isn't it? In terms of who's behind the uprising in Syria, the Syrians have basically called out the West.
Sure. And the smart people, the academics, and some of the really good journalists, I don't fault them, they go through all these reasons why the Turks and the people from Qatar and the Saudis, why they inspire all this terrorism, why they fund, why they equip these terrorists. But they always miss or leave out or don't even think of the one country, yes, who profits from this, right? Well, there's one country that is profiting immensely from this, and that is Israel. And it's not as though I'm making this up, for God's sake. 3 years ago, there was a new bureau chief for the New York Times in Jerusalem. And it was just at precisely the time when Obama almost did shock and awe against Syria. He pulled back, and incidentally, he was very proud of having resisted the advice of all his advisors and having pulled back. But at that time, this young reporter, Jody Ruderin, goes to the Israeli officials that she knows, and she says, I really find out how the Israelis look at this. So she says, what's your preferred outcome here in Syria? And Alan Pinkus, who was a pretty high diplomat, he used to be head of the consulate in New York, he says, well, Jody, now this doesn't sound really good. But in reality, our preferred outcome is no outcome. And she says, totalitarism would play? I mean, no, come on. He says, yeah, I told you, Jody. That doesn't sound very humanitarian, but the way we look at this Syria thing is it's like a playoff game where you don't want either team to win, but you don't want either team to lose either. As long as Shia and Sunni are at each other's throats, not only in Syria, but in the whole area, quote, Israel has nothing to fear from Syria, period, end quote. That's right there. Now, luckily, Jody Ruderin's masters in New York were off sipping martinis for the Labor Day weekend on Long Island. And so the censor wasn't there, and it got onto the front page of the New York Times. Look it up, September 6, 2013. The Israeli take on why they prefer no outcome. Now, is there a big jump between what the Israelis prefer and what John Kerry, who's sort of like the water boy for the neocons, the water boy for Tory England and all the others? No. they brag about there being no daylight between the preferences of Israel on the one hand, the preferences of the neocon of the United States on the other, and that's what you call a neocon. So that's as much a factor as Saudi or Turkish or people in Qatar or any other element, including this pipeline. Now, the pipeline, I think, has a major role to play here, but I don't think it's enough. It's a bunch of reasons, and just like Iraq, what I always said, it was, we call it oil. O for oil, I for Israel, and L for logistics, the permanent military bases we coveted in Iraq. That was the complicated, not so complicated set of reasons why we went in there, and it's not very clear, and it's not very different on Syria. The only difference is that the Israeli part of that triangle is much more, in effect, much more influential than it was in going into Iraq. Iraq oil and the permanent military bases played more of a role.
Ray, is Donald Trump Israel's president?
Is he Israel's president?
Yeah.
Well, we'll have to see how this plays out. We have to give this guy the benefit of the doubt. If he's a dealer, right? If he's a deal maker, and even more questionable, if he's his own man, right? Then when he hears this pap coming from his son-in-law and from the other people that he's already appointed to look after relations with Israel, he'll get wise to the fact that, hey, we're being diddled. We'll give him lots of money. And what do we get for it? What we get for it is perpetual hostility on the part of everybody has a sense of justice in that part of the world. That's not a very good deal. So let's see how he works out this policy. It can't be any worse than John Kerry, who pretended to be flying around. Well, he did fly around. I think his major task was to travel more miles and get more mileage plus miles on his account than Condoleezza Rice did. And she did better than Kissinger. She actually, the Arabs had an interesting glance, a gloss on Condoleezza Rice. So you know what Condoleezza means? It translates from English, it's perpetual motion without achieving anything. so Kerry has outdone her on that, and Kerry is so arrogant. I think there's a chance that he actually believes that the U.S. is the sole indispensable country in the world, and believing that, he's just totally mystified why he can't, quote, align forces, end quote.
Well, Ray, that brings us... Sorry to interrupt. That brings us to that extraordinary exchange. By the way, folks, to read more of this, go to raymcgovern.com. Immediately bookmark Ray's website. I can't recommend it highly enough. That extraordinary exchange between Kerry and Steve Clements. Kerry saying, I've never seen anything like this. So many conflicts going on. Kurd against Kurd, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Turkey, Sunnis, everybody's involved. And Clements said, why did you try, or why did you say or think you could get a ceasefire there? So we're back to the old, we're back to the old chicken and egg thing again. Are these people perpetually stupid, or is this perpetually part of a bigger plan, the Greater Israel Project, that, which you described perfectly a few minutes ago, our preferred outcome is no outcome at all?
Well, I think it's both. Kerry's not the sharpest knife in the drawer. Let's face it. I mean, watching him over these last 4 years has been very painful. I think that there is a certain hubris. This is a tragic flaw that led to the downfall of all those tragic heroes in the Aeschylus, Euripides, and Sophocles plays there in ancient Greece. There was always a flaw, and usually was hubris, and it had to do with overweening pride. You go to the best schools, you have a really nice coif on the top of your head, right? You dress up with fancy ties, you're real tall, and you can speak in a stentorian voice, right? And so the world should listen to you. These guys have a terrible wake-up call. They already had it in November with the election, and they can't do things like they used to. Now, it used to be possible And this is a point that most people don't really know about. It used to be possible for the U.S. to work its will no matter where, no matter what. Okay, and the Soviet Union kind of stepped up to that, so it became not a matter of no matter where anymore. They couldn't do it. The Soviet interests were in play. Now, the Soviet Union fell apart, right? That year, we had a war against the Gulf War against Iraq, who had invaded Kuwait, and we accomplished that war with great virtuosity and great acclaim. And after that war, Paul Wolfowitz, who was one of the defense people who worked with Dick Cheney and others on that, he was asked by the former commander of NATO troops, Wesley Clark, 4-star general. He says, and he went to Paul. He said, "Well, Paul, that was great. Well, yeah, I'm so proud of how our armed forces decimated those Iraqis. Now, tell me, what was the main lesson you draw from this?" And Wolfowitz surprised him by saying, "Oh, the most important lesson is we can do these things, and the Russians won't stop us."
Right.
Okay, 1991. 2003, we invade Iraq much closer to Russia, and the Russians won't stop us. Okay? Now, go forward to 2013, we're about to strike Syria, and the Russians stop us. With military might? No. Putin says to Kerry, "Look, you're really concerned about those chemical weapons in Syria? We can get the Syrians, get rid of them." And Obama says, "You can." And Putin says, "Watch me." Next day, Syrian foreign minister gets up and says, "We have agreed to give up all our chemical weapons from our army arsenal for destruction on a U.S. naval ship, especially outfitted for destroying chemical weapons." Most people don't know that. Not only did they do that, but it's been accomplished. They've all been destroyed. Okay, so by intervening in a peaceful way, he pulled Obama's chestnuts out of the fire. Now, that was 2013. Now, you go to 2014, when the neocons retaliate by overthrowing the government in Kiev right on Moscow's doorstep, right? And they put in a guy who says, "Oh, let's join NATO."
Yeah.
Well, that was one regime change too far. There, the Russians stopped us. A year later, in Syria, the Russians stopped us. And poor Kerry, he can't get used to the notion that the United States can no longer work its will around the world, because this time the Russians will stop us, whether it's by peaceful or whether it's by putting their air force in Syria, as they did over a year ago.
Tell me about the Western media, and we're not talking about the United States on its own. We're talking about the media of the United Kingdom, talking about war crimes in Aleppo and indiscriminate bombing, and using sources like Doctors Without Borders to talk about terrible crimes committed by the Russian and the Syrian joint forces. Where is that coming from, Ray? Is there any truth in that? Is it an inevitable consequence of the Islamic State jihadists and the so-called moderate rebels, of which I've never believed existed anyway? That's just my personal opinion. If you've got to get these guys out of a city, is it inevitable? Is it tragic that some people are going to die? I mean, I keep making the analogy, Ray, God forbid if you and I were being held by a deranged gunman in a bank or in a supermarket. You know, the specialist police guys eventually have to come through the door at some stage, and there is a possibility that somebody's going to be hurt in that. Is that what's gone on in eastern Aleppo, or is there some truth to the claims by the totality of the Western media that crimes have been committed?
Well, Richie, I don't know if this will embarrass you, but you're very much in line with Barack Obama 3 years ago, when Friedman from the New York Times asked him at a televised interview, "Well, what about these moderate rebels?"
Yeah.
And Obama laughed. And he said, "Obama, you mean but these doctors and dentists and they're a fantasy." That's what he said. A fantasy. His word, fantasy. So, for some reason, about a year ago, like Lazarus resurrected from the tomb, these fantastic rebels, moderates, came out of the woodwork, out of the tomb, and became part of the play. Now, what's at play here are people like Israel and others who want to keep this thing going, okay? The arms merchants want to keep this thing going. And so when Kerry, to his credit, worked out with Lavrov this ceasefire agreement, partial ceasefire agreement on the 9th of September, just a couple months ago, that was a big breakthrough. Now, what happened? Well, it went into effect on the 12th. Things seemed to be going well, and all of a sudden, an Air Force general says, well, I don't know if we want to share targeting information or any kind of intelligence with the Russians. Oh, wait a second. That was part of the deal. That was what Obama and Putin, much less Lavrov and Kerry, agreed on. That was, well, it says Air Force guys, I don't know if we want to do that. We probably won't do it. And then 5 days later, U.S. Air Force attacks fixed Syrian army positions on the top of hills and decimates those units. It kills 80, 90 people and wounds 100 others. End of ceasefire. So what's going on here? Well, that's what the question that Putin and Lavrov asked. Who's running this? Who's running Washington? And they decided that they can't trust. This is big. They can't trust Obama when he says, oh, this is a deal. And so what do? They said, look, we hate to say this, but we've got our own no-fly zone now in Syria. Just be aware, just so we don't want any surprises here, that anything flying over Syria, whether it's a missile, whether it's an aircraft, whatever it is, we're going to shoot it down. You got that? Now, again, no surprises here. We can shoot down stealth aircraft. You think we can't? Well, let's not try it because we can. And lastly, please be aware that we won't have enough time to identify the origin of the aircraft. So anything that is not pre-identified to us, we're going to shoot down. Whoa! Nobody knows that. New York Times didn't report that. Why did the New York Times and I'm sure the British newspapers not report that? Well, because some cowboy from the U.S. Air Force at some point said, oh, yeah, you think, oh, I got this really, really souped up stealth aircraft. I'm going to fly right in and it's going to get shot down. And then the headlines will be, without any warning, the Russians shot down a U.S. aircraft and the ball goes up, okay? So it's all very sinister. The press is in it to its teeth. I've never, this is something I've been around for 50 years here, Richie. I've never seen a more captivated, the mainstream media, so-called, dishing out propaganda from the centers of power.
I have this theory, and I love my theories. I love having them. I mean, they're not born out of the sort of experience that you've had, Ray. But I brought up Trump earlier because I worry that Trump and Gerardo Colman, who has appeared on RT a bit in recent times, Irish journalist in Paris, who I think has got a very calm and measured, like yourself, approach to these things. Gerard says, and I tend to agree with him, his concern is that there will appear to be a kind of a détente between the United States and Russia in the first 6 months of Trump's presidency because of things that have gone on during the campaign. But that the neocons whom have surrounded Trump, and let's be honest, he's appointed one or two of them, they will try, on behalf of the Israeli government, to mess up the deal with Iran and push, an aggressive stance against Iran, which is another way of pushing Russia. How do you see that?
Well, I think that's a very legitimate concern. Trump himself has said a bunch of bad things about the agreement between the 5 members of the Security Council and Germany and and Iran to prevent them from getting a nuclear weapon for at least 10 years. Okay, now what's wrong with that agreement? Well, a lot of people don't want that kind of détente with Iran to happen. And so a lot of the people with whom Trump has already surrounded himself have said, that's got to go. That agreement's got to go. Not so fast. The reason this agreement became possible, despite the strong opposition from the Jewish lobby in our country, is because Germany, France, even the UK, and Russia and China want a deal with Iran. Iran's not a dinky little country. It's got 85 million people, and it's got immense resources, and it's got oil, and it's got gas. They have economic interests that won't quit. And so they'll go ahead. They won't do sanctions on Iran, and the U.S. will be even more isolated, left out in right field, literally right field, and it will all be shown to be simply a vendetta against Iran because Netanyahu says that's what we should do.
What about my underlying theory that you and I have, I wouldn't say butted heads, I wouldn't dare butt your head, Ray, to be honest. I wouldn't mess with you. But
well, it's a thick Irish head. I think you're probably going too.
Yeah, I have a thick Irish head, yeah. And I'm a Capricorn, so I'm stubborn. You know from speaking with me before that I and others connected to the programme, we believe that there is a sinister attempt to create a new world order out of a massive conflict, and that there are those crazy enough to want to push Russia and China to the brink and maybe beyond the brink of a global conflict. So I won't bore you to death by asking the same old question every time you come on, but do you think, if Iran was to be pushed in that way, that what we've seen happen in Syria with Russia and Russia's stubbornness and willingness to stand up for its own interests, that it's a possibility in the future that maybe we're closer to that crazy conflict, maybe not nuclear maybe, but maybe a conflict fought in various regions around the world using proxies, that maybe we are closer to it than even we were in the original Cold War. What do you think?
Well, Richie, I share your diagnosis of the powers that be, the financial sectors and the people who are running the economies of the world. I think it's already there. It's already happening. The question really is whether they think they're strong enough to do that. And the answer I come up with is if they have any smarts at all, they realize that the U.S. position and the position of the West has deteriorated markedly vis-a-vis Russia and China, precisely because Russia and China are now, for all intents and purposes, allies. China surprised the hell out of me by cheering Russia on in seizing Crimea, in going into Syria. The Chinese don't usually like to see that kind of thing, and yet they have welcomed it, and their propaganda has spoken in favor of it. They have this Silk Road deal, which won't quit, and which is going to be implemented within our lifetime even. And so if they have these grand illusions or delusions, they're going to come up short because the strategic situation has changed in profound ways, and mostly it has to do with China and Russia being pretty much together on many of these main issues, which is not what used to be the case, at least when I was when I was studying Russian. My first account was Sino-Soviet relations, and in those days there were 15 Soviet divisions on China's border, and we were convinced that they hate each other forever. It was sort of like you had that genes. Well, nothing is forever. They don't hate us. They don't hate each other half as much as they hate what they used to call the great power chauvinists, the imperialists, and I used to think that was a bunch of propaganda, but 2008 came, and the Wall Streetsky Kravatici, which they call the Wall Street bloodsuckers. Well, I always thought that was excessive, but I almost lost my mortgage in 2008 as well.
The enemy of mine enemy is my friend kind of a thing. I want to ask you finally, Ray, the reporting of what happened in Berlin yesterday is typically polarised and is typically black and white. So on the one hand, you have the alternative right, you have InfoWars and Alex Jones and Paul Joseph Watson screaming about Islam being the religion of peace, not, and all this sort of rhetoric. And on the other hand, you have the kind of what I call the kind of bourgeois metropolitan lefties over here who say that, you know, Angela Merkel did the right thing by taking in all the refugees last year because it sends a very definite signal to Islamic State. We will continue to welcome people with open arms. We won't fall for your hatred and your divide and conquer tactics. But I often suggest here, and I'm not a learned man, but I've been around the media for a long time, that often the truth is much more grey than this black and white thing. What do you think of what Merkel did last year, Ray, finally, in terms of letting in so many refugees, asylum seekers, in light of what was going on in Syria and elsewhere? And is there any truth to the accusations levelled at her that was a stupid thing to do and it was going to inevitably lead to, you know, the sort of things that we saw last night? Or is that unfair? How do you see that? It's complicated, isn't it?
It's very complicated. I was in Germany in September of last year when the stream of refugees started pouring into Germany. My colleague and I arrived in Rostock, in the northernmost part of what used to be eastern Germany. Got out of the Bahnhof there, into the Bahnhof, the railroad station. The place was teeming. There were suitcases all over the place, open. There was a great sign on the wall saying, "Alle haben die gleichen Rechte." Everyone has the same rights. Coffee, donuts being handed out to these. They were Syrian refugees. My colleague spoke Arabic. She went down and she talked to them. They were so relieved. They were so happy. Okay, and I said to myself, "Wow, you know, Merkel is the daughter of a minister. She must have learned that you welcome the refugee. My God, what a gutsy thing to do." Now, was it a smart thing to do politically? No, especially without making adequate provision to vet these people, at least summarily as they came in. But I think she led with her heart, and I don't fault her for that. And I think that since she's more a politician than a minister's daughter, she's going to pay a political price for that. Perhaps lose her job this September in the elections. But, I applauded it. What are you going to do? Turn these people away? What I don't applaud is people in the German press, and was just as bad as the UK Europe. There was not a word. There was not a word about why these Syrian refugees are coming in.
Yeah, that's right.
It was crazy. It was awful. We changed the topic of our tour from "Wie werden Kriege gemacht?" how our wars made, to "Wie werden Flüchtlinge gemacht?" which means how is it that refugees are made? Of course, the answer is the same. These damn wars that are made for reasons other than the powers pretend.
Ray, I want to thank you very much for coming on the programme this year, particularly, and giving us your time when it's in such demand. We really appreciate it. You're a terrific analyst, Ray. I've been presenting... No, I really mean I've been presenting and producing programmes for the best part of 20 years, commercially, nationally, and in the independent media. And you're absolutely brilliant. RayMcGovern.com is Ray's website. That's where you'll find his articles and his insights. 5 presidents he briefed, CIA analysts for more than 30 years. And, it really is terrific. I really do mean that. So I want to wish you a Merry Christmas.
And Happy New Year to you, Richie.
Look after yourself, my friend. Have a great time. Have a great holiday. And bye for now. We'll speak in the new year. The terrific Ray McGovern on the line to us there from his home in New York City.